Hello, fellow book readers. My name is John, and this is my new channel where I am going to talk about books. I really got back into book reading in 2024. It was a big, big year of book reading for me. I read 53 books. And over the past 10 years, I would say I only read about 10 new fiction books and maybe like 10 or so nonfiction books. At the end of last year, I reread Lord of the Rings for, I think, the third time, and I enjoyed it. So going into the new year, I decided to make my New Year's resolution to read 20 books this year. Safe to say I blew it out of the water. I have all these book thoughts in my head right now, and I just don't know where to put them, so I'll talk about them here. So in this video, I want to talk just a little bit about every book I read this year in a non-spoiler way. What I want to do is rank them 53 to 1, and these rankings are not definitive, I would say. Like, some of them are more tiered, so you can move them around a little bit. But I just want to talk about all of them a tiny bit. Number 53 would be The Sword in the Stone by T.H. White. It is the first book in the Instant Future King series. It's a coming-of-age tale about King Arthur and how he became king. It's just a little long, just a tiny bit too long, and it's really repetitive. And frankly, the character of King Arthur is really lame. Like, he's just not a good character. Merlin is fun. Unfortunately, he just doesn't save this book for me. It's not a bad book. It's just not for me. I didn't enjoy it. I actually actively hated my time reading it. It would be Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This book is one of the more highly recommended fantasy standalones, I would say. I didn't enjoy it. The storyline with the angel and the demon, anytime they're on the page together, it's great. Really good stuff. Unfortunately, the book is so long and they're not on the page nearly enough. I would say it's probably less than a quarter of the time they're on the page. And the other plots that are happening at the same time, they're just not as fun. The characters aren't as fun. The humor didn't work for me. I was really disappointed because I had never read Terry Pratchett or Neil Gaiman before, and I know they're both highly sought after authors. I was expecting a little bit more. Quite frankly, there was just like way too much bloat and side plots in this book. Like, they kept talking about Tibetans and Atlantis, and it had nothing to do with the plot. And it just didn't work for me. I'm sure other people love it. I heard the TV show cuts down on a lot of the bloat and the side plots, so maybe that would have been more for me than the book. But yeah, the book it didn't work for me. Obviously, it's well loved, so it's probably a good book, but I did not enjoy my time reading it. Next up would be The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Other Stories by Washington Irving. I think it's a collection of 10 short stories by Washington Irving. Obviously, the most famous being The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. And both those are great. They're a little bloated, I would say, and the prose is a bit outdated, but that's to be expected. The other 8, they drag. They just do. I mean, I'm sure they're good. As a matter of fact, I even enjoyed the climaxes in a lot of them, but getting to the climax in a lot of them was a chore. And there's one story in this book, I forget what it was called, but it's about how, like, older stories become outdated and they won't be as loved by people as much because of the prose. And I feel like this book actually suffers from that in modern times. Because I'm sure if I read this 60 years ago, I loved it. But I did not love it. I did not like my time reading it. I found myself, sort of skimming pages. And when you do that, you're really hating your time reading a book. And that's what happened for me in this book right here. Next up, we got, at number 50, we got Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. This one is actually quite fun, for the most part. But there's parts of it that just drag, and there's parts of it that's, I think, are supposed to be humorous that just that are not humorous. The parts where Peter Pan is a dick and he's just like a dick of a child, those parts are great, and that's everything I knew about that book going in. It was like Peter Pan's kind of a dick, and he is. He's a big dick. But the other parts of the story just don't work for me. Like the part where Peter Pan just calls Wendy mom for like a bajillion pages. Like I get it. We didn't have to keep saying it over and over again. And you don't get to really know any of the other cast characters besides for Peter and Wendy. I think this book could have been about 20 pages shorter, and it's already a very short book. You'll have a good time reading it, but there's going to be parts where you're just like, eh. Or at least I was like, eh. Number 49, this might be a little controversial, but Dune Messiah, which is the second book in the Dune series. The first Dune book feels a lot like a fantasy book, and this Dune Messiah, it really goes full sci-fi, which is fine. It just wasn't what I was expecting. I mean, there's atomic bombs, there's people like coming back from the dead. There's a lot of crazy stuff in this book. And frankly, I know the first book sets it up. There's foreshadowing. I am not a big fan of the hero becomes the villain storyline. And it was executed fine in this book, but I did not enjoy it. I just didn't. Thankfully, it's a little short on the short side, so I didn't hate this book, but it just wasn't for me. Number 48, we have Harry Potter and the Cursed Child by J.K. Rowling. Let me put it this way. I enjoyed being back in the Harry Potter world. I love that world. The world still feels the same. It still feels magical and great. And I read this quick. I read it in a day. So, really quick. It's really short. That's about the only positive thing I can say about it. The rest of all Draco, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Snape, even Dumbledore, none of the characters feel the same as they did in the original series. They're all completely changed. None of them feel like the same character. It's quite astonishing that this book is supposed to be considered canon. I think if you look at it as this is just like non-canon, alternate universe, whatever, that's fine. But there's just so many plot holes, and the characters don't feel the same that I can't get it any higher than 49. 48, we got The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. This is a good, safe Halloween book, holiday book. It's a children's book. It's about, I think, 12? It's 12 children that go trick-or-treating, and something happens to one of the children, and they go on a quest to, like, find him. With this creepy old guy who is more than he seems. Let's just put it that way. The problem is you don't really get to know any of the characters besides the main character. The main child you get to know. The other, like, 11 children, you don't get to know at all. It's a little too short, I would say, but it also feels a little bit too long at the same time. It's fine, but it isn't for me. Like, I thought it was just okay. We got The Children of Dune. This one I liked a little bit more than Dune Messiah. It still has the same problem where it's like the hero of the last book becomes the villain again. So they're running the same plot back again, but it's a little bit better. I think it's a little bit longer too, but I do like the characters in this a little bit more. In this one, a little bit more. It's got the Lady Jessica, who is my favorite character in the Dune series, in it. She was not in Dune Messiah, so I think that's pretty much why I like Children of Dune a little bit more. But yeah, basically they ran the same plot back, just a little bit better executed, and with characters I enjoyed a little bit more. Still not really for me though. The Children of Hurin by J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah, this book is good. Don't get me wrong, it's good. It's just not what I want to read when I read Tolkien. Like when I read Tolkien, I'm looking for characters to root for, and the main character in this is you basically can't root for him. He is awful. He's just an awful character, and I don't mean like awful as in he's a bad character. I mean awful as in like he's a terrible person. Like he makes bad decision after bad decision. He is mean to everybody. And the book is spoiled in the beginning. You know what's going to happen at the end in the beginning of the book because they just tell you. The villain just straight up tells you what's going to happen. And it happens. It's a tragic story, for sure. And like I said, it's technically good. But I just had hard time connecting with the main character. So for that reason, I didn't enjoy it as much. We got The Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan. Riordan? I'm not sure how to say his name, to be honest with you. It's the second book in the original Percy Jackson series. So the original series is the first 5 books. This is the second one. It's the weakest. I think it's generally considered the weakest by the fan base too. It's also the shortest, so that has that going for it. But frankly, the cast of characters is not as strong as in the other books, I don't think. The plot is not as important as it is in the other books, I don't think. It's more of a setup book, and it sets things up fine. I didn't hate my time here, but I also didn't love it. It's just fine. Like, it was really not a book for me, but also not terrible. I didn't hate my time reading it. The Football 100 by Mike Sando, Dan Pompei, and the Athletic NFL staff. So this is a book that ranks the top 100 players in NFL history, and it writes little articles about them. And they're ranked by the Athletic staff, which is a website / newsletter. It's really well done. I think I was just expecting more. If you're an NFL fan, which obviously I am, you're gonna love it. Well, not love it. You'll like it, I should say. But if you've read the Book of Basketball by Bill Simmons, you're gonna be like, this could have been better. Like that's how I felt. Anyway, I think I just compared it to that book too much, and that book also ranks. I think it ranks top 96 NBA players. That book's just better. Like it's just better written. But yeah, you're still gonna love this book. Or like this book. It's got good stuff in it, and I enjoyed learning about some of the players I knew nothing about. There's like a lot of talk about NFL players from the 60s and 50s in here, and the 70s. And it's like I didn't know as much about those players as I do like the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s players. So good stuff in here. I definitely didn't hate my time here, but I thought it could have been a little better. We got A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. Really good trilogy. I love this trilogy. The second book is not my favorite book of all time. It's about this like magic tournament that's going on in Red London, and I'll get more into what the series is about when I talk about the first book. But in Red London, and I love like tournaments like that. But unfortunately, the tournament just like isn't important, and it ends on such a whimper that's like, why? Why did you hype me up for this tournament and then just like not deliver? And the bad guy sort of there, like he doesn't really do it. It's totally a setup book, and it should be a setup book, but I don't think it's a great setup book, I'm trying to say. And then there's Delilah Bard, who is the main character, and she is really not my favorite character in fiction. She very much is very Delilah Bard in this book, where she's just mean and quite frankly hard to root for, and does some things that I would consider just straight up evil. So there's that. The rest of the characters are great though. To go with Kobe Bryant and the Mamba Mentality, How I Play by Kobe Bryant himself. He wrote this book. This book is really more of a coffee book, I would say. Coffee table book, I should say. It has a lot of great pictures in it. It's formatted really great. There's not much of a story here or book here in terms of words. It's not an autobiography. It's how he plays the game of basketball. So he goes over his workout that he used to do pregame and did going into the NBA season, how he would guard certain players, how he trained, how he played through injuries. Is just like his mentality. Even if he like certain games he would listen to music beforehand, and certain he wouldn't. It's like really, really interesting stuff. But if you're expecting like this big epic with a lot of words, no, there's only like 50 or 60,000 words in this book. It's not a very wordy book, but it's good. The words that are there are good, and I really liked it. So now we're getting into the books that I would say go up to the next tier, which is like the good tier. Like there's not much wrong with these books. I really enjoyed them. They were for me. Everything from here on out is good, at least good. Some of it goes to great. Some of it goes a little bit higher than that. Next up would be A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, which is the first book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. So the Shades of Magic trilogy is about these 4 different Londons with varying degrees of magic, including the London that exists on our Earth, right? And that London has no magic. And there's these certain magicians that can travel between 4 Londons. I know there's only 2 of them that exist. It's a story about those 2 magicians and how they're traveling between the 4 Londons, and the 4 Londons have varying degrees of magic. You have like Red London, which has a lot of magic, and the magic is there in a good way. You have White London, which has magic there in a bad way. Magic is starting to destroy White London. And then you have Black London, which magic has already destroyed Black London, right? So the magician from White London is trying to basically stop the magic from destroying White London, right? And then the magician from Red London is sort of trying to stop the magician from White London from destroying Red London. That is a tongue twister. And the book really works. All the characters are great. Like I said, I don't love Delilah Bard, but she is better in this book than she is in the second book. She's a little bit more sympathetic, and she's not even really the main character in this book. I would say Kels is the main character, and he's awesome. Great character. Holland is awesome, and so is Rise. The villains, they're a little bit of Saturday morning cartoon type villains, so if you don't love that, you may not like that part of the book, but the book really does work for me. I liked it a lot. Next up is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is the first book in the Folk of the Air trilogy. Some people call this a romantasy, but it just isn't, especially the first book. The first book is really more of like a political war type book where there's just like backstabbing going on, people playing politics. It's an awesome book. I like it a lot. If you're looking for romance, you're not going to like this book, I don't think, because there isn't any. I don't know what people are talking about online. There's just none. This book has a lot of, like I said, backstabbing and politics going on, and the characters are just really interesting. So yeah, I like this book a lot. Stuff would be Welcome to Dunder Mifflin: The Oral History of the Office by Brian Baumgartner, who plays Kevin Malone on The Office. You can basically get the story of this book in podcasts now because there's so many podcasts about The Office from members of The Office. But this book is really well done, and I would encourage anybody to pick it up. There's just a lot of cool info in it, and the pictures are great, and it's formatted really nicely, and it's a very easy read, even though it's a little bit long. If you like The Office, you're going to love this book. And I love The Office, so I liked it. We got The Advent of Winter, which is edited by Don McDermott. It's a collection of 24 short stories that are supposed to act as an advent calendar. The only rules for the stories were they have to be fantasy and they have to somehow involve winter. And it could be anything. The winter could be like central to the plot, or it could just be a backdrop, or it could be like part of the magic. It could be anything. And it really, the stories have a nice varying degree of how they use winter, and it's great. And it's by 24 self-published authors. Some of the stories are a little better than others. They're not all for me, but I think all of them are objectively good. My favorite of the 24 stories was A Cold Broad River by Tim Hardy. I thought that story was awesome, and I would love to read more about that world. And I'm sure I could. I think there are other stories about that world by Tim Hardy. At least I've heard. So probably check some of that stuff out next year. The Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan. Great book. It's not as good as the other Percy Jackson books that are going to be on the list, but it's really good. And there's this one scene in particular I'll talk about where Percy meets Calypso on an island, and they're like on a deserted island by themselves, and that scene rules. And Calypso is awesome, and I want to read more about her in this world. That's the only book she's in the original 5 books, but I think she might be in more in other Percy Jackson books, so I look forward to reading those. Next up would be The Ice Dragon by George R.R. Martin, which is a short story edited into a novella. Um, yeah, this story rules. You can tell it has this like it's this. He wrote this, I think, in 1980 or at least in the early 80s. He wrote it pre A Song of Ice and Fire, but you can tell Song of Ice and Fire definitely gets some influence from it. And it's classic George. Like the story is bitter and tragic and cold and awesome. Just a great book. And this particular edition is edited for children, so there is one scene that's cut out of it, but I actually think it makes the story better. I think the scene that got cut out of it is frankly unnecessary and makes the story worse. So, yeah, I recommend this to all George fans. Plus, the illustrations are really nice in this particular edition. Next up would be Dream Songs Volume 1 by George R.R. Martin. This is a collection of 22 short stories that span from his start as a writer as a teenager all the way to the mid 80s. And it's mostly sci-fi, but there's some horror in there. There's some historical fiction. There's some fantasy. There's some hybrids of all three or four. And of the 22 stories, I think it's only like 3 or 4 that I didn't enjoy. And then there's like 7 or 8 that are great. My favorite being Bitter Balloons, I think. But I love all of them. I loved a lot of them, I should say. And I'm going to talk about this book, more in detail in a future video. Next up is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is like the classic story of a good twist at the end of a book. This twist is legendary, and even though I knew it already, everybody knows it. Like, it still was awesome. Great book. Great story. Short, too. I think everybody should read it at some point in their life. Next up would be The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickinson. Next up is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Not Dickinson. Dickens. Great book. Obviously, it's a classic. I'm sure you've seen the movie or the animated special by the Muppets or Mickey or somebody. It still holds up today. Obviously, Dickens is an amazing author, and his prose is timeless, and the story is awesome. Must read around the holidays. Next up is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a romantasy. It's really good. I don't know what else to say about it. It's, the Fae are awesome and creepy and dark in it, and that's what I wanted. It's very, very creepy, very dark, and it ends on a happy note. I couldn't have asked for more. Good read during the fall, too. There's good fall theming in it. Really good book. Next up would be Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, which is the first book in the Percy Jackson series. This book is a great introduction to the characters. The story is not, as good or as high stakes as the later half of the series, but it's so charming, and the characters are so innocent, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it's shorter too. It's on the shorter side. I think it's like 330 pages or something like that. Really solid book. And I can see why it's as popular as it is, although the movie is not good. Next up is Half a King by Joe Abercrombie, which is the first book in his Shattered Sea series, which is his young adult trilogy. He's more known for writing adult fantasy, sort of like in the same vein of style as George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. So people are a little disappointed online with this series. I see it like not talked about as highly, but this series is awesome, and it's like not even really young adult. I don't like the character is. I guess the main character is like 17, but there's death, there's gore, there's like sex, there's everything that you would find in an adult novel in this book, and the twists and turns are a little predictable in the first book, but it's still awesome, and the characters are fun and great and different, and there's not much to dislike about it. So yeah, needless to say, I like it. Oh, and if you like Vikings and Scandinavian culture, yeah, this book delivers that in spades. Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. I think it's the weakest of the Throne of Glass series. I think Every book in the Throne of Glass series is very good, so I do like this book quite a lot. But it's a total setup book, and unfortunately, the only spoiler in the series I knew going into the series was the twist at the end of this book. So yeah, it still worked for me. Like that twist was still like, yes, good, but knowing it beforehand probably brings the book down a little bit for me. Um, and quite frankly, the plot is a little disjointed in this book. There's not much there plot wise, and I got a little frustrated because I really like the trio. I like Dorian, Selena, and Chal when they're together, and I like them when they're separated. Those three characters are awesome. I love those three characters. But they spent half the book Selena's mad at one of them, and then the other half she's mad at the other one. So it's like, okay, cool, I guess. Still a good book though. Would be The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas, which is a collection of 5 novellas packaged into one book. And it's the prequel to Throne of Glass. You can call it Book 0, I guess, or Book 0.5. Unlike some prequels, this is like a must read. Like, you have to read it because the later half of the series doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you don't read this book. And I read this book third in the series, and the end of the book is spoiled in the first 2 books. So if you read the first 2 books before you read this, you know what's going to happen at the end of The Assassin's Blade. But it doesn't matter. Like, it still got me emotional. Like, this book is awesome. I'm not the biggest fan of the first novella in this book. I think the first novella is the weakest part of the entire series. But the other 4 all deliver. My favorite would be The Assassin in the Desert. Favorite of the collection of 5. Next up is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. It's the second book in the Imperium series. I have no idea if I'm saying that even close to correctly, but it's the second book in the Fourth Wing series, if we're going to be real. I don't know what else. I think it's just like a easier way to say it. I like this one. I know this one isn't liked by as many people as Fourth Wing, but I enjoyed it. Not as much as I enjoyed Fourth Wing, but I enjoyed it. This book reminds me a lot of A Song of Ice and Fire in terms of, like, every time I read that series, I'm like super nervous every time I'm going from page to page. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. Is somebody going to die? It's like terrifying. And that's how I felt reading this book. I was just waiting for death and disaster to happen. Like, this book was a nerve-wracking experience to read. And I actually quite liked the twist at the end. So, yeah, I like this one a lot. I think, and from here on out, we're into books that I would consider great. I had a great time reading it, and this is like the first one in that tier, I would say. So yeah, I think this one's a great book. I enjoyed it. Conjuring of Light by V.E. Swab, and this is the last book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. I think it's the best one in the Shades of Magic trilogy. It's also the longest, but I liked the villain a lot in this book. This book has a lot more Reese. I'm not entirely sure how you say his name, but he's my favorite character in the trilogy. So I quite like that. It has more Holland, too. I think Holland's an awesome character. Delilah Bard is a little bit more sympathetic than she was in the last book, and just frankly, it was a little easier to root for her in this book. And to top it all off, you have the conclusion of the King and Queen storyline with Kels, and I think that storyline is really good, and I think it's really well done in this book. So, yeah, I think this book's great. The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan. Still probably saying his name wrong, by the way. That's the last book in the original Percy Jackson series. I think it's a great end, very, very satisfying end. It ended exactly how I wanted it to end. Yeah, and the book is a little different than the other books, because they're not at, Half-Blood Camp the entire year like they are in the other books, but I think it's actually a welcome change of pace that the book takes place over a little bit shorter period of time. I think if you like the other 4, you're going to love this ending. It's a good book. It's a great book, actually. I really enjoyed it. Dune by Frank Herbert. It's the first book in the Dune series, obviously. Great book. Great book. I mean, I loved this book. Like, the Bene Gesserit are just awesome characters, and the Lady Jessica specifically is one of my favorite characters I've read this year. So, yeah, great book. And like I said, it's shocking kind of what happens in this book. I did not expect nearly as many deaths that happened as that did happen. But yeah, great book. Is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is probably my most surprising read of the year. I expected to hate this book just because I thought it was going to be like really outdated and the prose was going to stink, and it's quite long. And that's like it's longer than it looks here because the way this particular edition is formatted, there's just a lot on each page. But it's great. Like the prose is still very easy to read. The highs are really high. There's parts of it that are a little repetitive, but it doesn't matter. It's great. Like it's great. Like the first act with Jonathan in Castle Dracula with Count Dracula. That's like one of the best first acts I've ever read. And the way the story is formatted with it's like a journal entries and different notes and letters and newspaper articles. Perfect. Next up, Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is like a modern day Disney fairy tale in prose form. That's what it is. It from beginning to end, that's what it feels like, and I think he really did a good job nailing that style and feeling. And yeah, I love the talking rat. It's just so funny. Like, I don't. Really hard to make talking characters good, and talking animals good, and he did it in this book. It worked. The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. I love the Silmarillion. Now, granted, I'm a big fan of history. I have my bachelor's in history. I don't know why I'm pointing at the wall. You cannot see it. It's behind the camera. But yeah, even fake history I love, and this book is a great collection of fake history, and I love the story of the Silmarils. And quite frankly, I thought the Children of Húrin was like my least favorite part of the Silmarillion, and it only goes up from there. Silmarillion's great. Yeah, everybody should read it if you like Tolkien. The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. It's the third book in the Folk of the Air trilogy. I would say this one is the most romantasy-like of the three. Yeah, it's a very good book. I don't know. Some people don't like the snake plotline. I actually really thought it worked well, and yeah, I love the conclusion for the main characters. And Jude is awesome. So is Cardan. I don't really know how to say his name. Maddox is Maddox in this book. Like, this book's just great. I really like the conclusion. I know some people think this is the weakest of the three. I don't. I liked it more than the cool ones. I think it's great. Next up would be The Wicked King by Holly Black, and this is the second book in the Folk of the Air trilogy, and it's by far the best one. It has the politics of the first book. They're just dialed up to 10, and the stakes are way higher, and you know the characters better. Awesome book, and the twist at the end I didn't see coming, so I enjoyed that. Yeah, I don't have enough good words to say about this book. This book's great, and I think it's generally considered the best of the trilogy, and it definitely is. It would be Half a War by Joe Abercrombie, which is the third and final book in the Shattered Sea trilogy. This book has a really satisfying end. The twists are great. The war is really well done and detailed. The main new point of view character in this book is Princess Scara, and she's awesome. Like, great point of view character. I didn't enjoy the other point of view character that was introduced as much, but it didn't matter because he wasn't in it nearly as much. So yeah, I definitely think this was a satisfying book. Very great end. Next up would be Half the World by Joe Abercrombie, which is the second book in the Shattered Sea trilogy. I think it's the best one. I really enjoy the two new point of view characters that are introduced in this book, Thorn and what was the second one's name? Brand. Especially Thorn. Thorn is awesome. One of my more favorite characters I've read this year, I would say. Yeah, and the story is just great. I love the story of how they go to a new city, and there's a lot of like politics involved and dastardly fighting, and yeah, it's good. It's really good, and you still Yarvi is still there, who's the main character in the first book. He's just not a point of view character anymore. But you don't like. It's not like he's shoved to the side. He's still like central to the story. He's just not the point of view character. It really works well. Next up would be The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third and final book in the original Mistborn trilogy. Yeah, this one's great. Satisfying ending. it would be in the perfect tier if it wasn't for the spooks storyline. I just that storyline just didn't connect with me as well. But every other part of this was great. I love the Vin and Ellen stuff, obviously, and the Say's stuff was really good too. And the end was, sad and tragic and good all at the same time. It was perfect. Great way to end the book. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say. It was really great. It would be The Titan's Curse by Rick Riordan. And this is the third book in the original Percy Jackson series. I think it's the best one. Zoe Nightshade is probably my favorite side character in the Percy Jackson universe, and she was the star of the show in this one. She was awesome. Great book. And I love the villain. I love the whole storyline. I love the quest. I love the new characters that were introduced. I love the gods that were used in this story. Yeah, this is my favorite one by far. So, next up would be Mistborn: The Final Empire, or just Mistborn, depending on which you get titled differently. I don't know why. Yeah, so the last 400 pages of this book are among the best I've read this year. Like, perfect book. But the first, 160 are a bit of a flog. It reminds me a lot of Fellowship of the Ring in that way. But, yeah, the last 400 pages make up for it. It's a great book. Would be Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands, which is the second book in the Emily Wilde series. It's great. I mean, it's not as good as the first, I don't think, but it's great. Like, Emily Wilde is making a map of the lost fairylands now, basically, and she has Wendell with her still. I just don't think the side characters in this book are as good, but the story is still awesome. Like, it's great. Like, anytime Wendell and Emily are on the page, like, you can't put the book down. They're just great characters, and their dog Shadow still there, and you still get to see Poe, who is like the little fairy. He's awesome. Great book. Next up would be Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which is the first book in the Imperium series, or Fourth Wing series. Still don't know how to say that. Next up, Empire Storms by Sarah J. Maas. That book is crazy. Like, the end of that book is insane. Like, I personally didn't see it coming, and it's one of the more powerful pieces of reading I did this year. That end of the book, that cliffhanger it's the most brutal cliffhanger I've ever read. Like, it was insane, and that's really all I have to say about it. And the rest of the book is fast paced and action filled, and a large cast of characters and a lot of point of view. So there's a lot of switching around, which could turn people off, I would imagine, but didn't bother me at all. Like, I thought it was great. Great book. That would be Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas. This is the sixth book in the Throne of Glass series. It's a little slower. It takes place at the same time as Empire of Storms, following a different cast of characters. So it pulls the George R.R. Martin, Dance with Dragons, Feast for Crows type thing. And this one's a little bit slower than Empire of Storms, but it's more emotional. It's just as important. I know some people say you should skip it. You should not skip it. Otherwise, you will not understand what the hell is going on in Kingdom of Ash. Great book. Yeah, I like it more than Empire of Storms, but just barely. It's like a smidge better. The Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, which is the book in the Throne of Glass series. It's a lot of people's least favorite. For me, I really like it. I think this book could actually act, and I think one of the main reasons I like it is this book could act as a standalone if it really wanted to. Like, the way it ends, it could act as a standalone. It obviously it doesn't, but I think it's a satisfying book and a satisfying ending. And it reminds me a lot of Harry Potter meets Lord of the Rings meets insert your favorite Disney fairy tale. That's kind of what the series reminds me of, and I think the first book does a good job with showing all three of those influences. Next up, I got One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. Great series. Great series. The magic in this series is very unique. It's this weird card magic. And the Nightmare is just an awesome character. And the rhyming. I'm not a big poetry rhymer fan, but it was great in this book. I don't know why. It spoke to me. It was really good. Yeah, I love this book. Awesome book, and I recommend it to anybody. And we're in now officially these last 7 or 8 books are in the perfect tier. Last 7 books are in the perfect tier. Like, I think all these books are perfect. I think this is a perfect book. This book is amazing. Don't know what else to say about it. Next up would be The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy. There's a lot of politics in this book that are not as popular as the other two Mistborn books, but I adore it. Personally, I love books when there's like politics in it, if you couldn't tell. And this book has a lot of that. Plus, this book really focuses on Elend a lot, and Elend is by far my favorite character in the original Mistborn trilogy. And there's also a siege in this, and sieges are actually like really hard to write, in my opinion. Like, you can make a very dull siege, but the siege in this book is by far the best siege I've ever. And it starts in the beginning of the book and doesn't end until the end of the book, and it's not boring for a single second. It's exciting the entire time. So yeah, this is a great book. I love it. I even like the twist at the end. It's good stuff. Next would be Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Yeah, this is a perfect book. Like I said, Wendell and Emily, still perfect in this book, but the cast of side characters in this book are amazing. Like, they're so fucking good. They're in this village in like this Nordic island, and Emily went there she's writing an encyclopedia of fairies, right? She's a professor at Cambridge University, and she studies fairies, so she's writing the first ever encyclopedia on fairies. So she went there to study these lost fae, or hidden fae, that nobody's ever studied before because they're, I guess, too dangerous. So she stays at this local village, right, in the middle of the winter. So it's like freezing there, there's snow, and the cast of characters in this village are all like, they're funny, or they're stern, or they're like caring. They're awesome. They're just awesome cast of characters. They're all different. They're all funny. They're all really cool when they're on the page. And then you meet some of the other characters, like you meet Poe, this fairy that lives in a tree. He's not a fae. He's not one of the tall ones, as they call him in this book. He's like small little fairy, and he's awesome. He's really funny. He's like sarcastic, and he's kind of mean, but he also isn't mean. He's great. And the plot itself is, very good. And Wendell is awesome, obviously, like I said. To me, this is how you define cozy fantasy. This is a very cozy fantasy book, and it works. It's perfect, and I can't wait for the third book and final book in the trilogy to come out in February. Next up would be Two Twisted Crowns, which is the second and last book in the One Dark Window duology by Rachel Gillig. So everything I said about One Dark Window applies here, except this book, you get to know a couple other characters because they're point of view characters that were not point of view characters in the first book, and they're awesome. And you get like a crazy good villain in Hoth Rowan, who is just awesome. Like, he is probably my most hated character I've read this year. Like, I hate him with a passion. He's awful human, and he's fun to hate. I don't know what else to say. Like, this book's really good, and it's a really good conclusion too. All right, we're into the top 3. You couldn't tell, they're all Throne of Glass books. Number 3 would be Kingdom of Ash, which I think this is controversial. Not controversial. This book's generally well liked, but I think people don't like it as much as the others. I like it just as much as the other 2 books I'm about to mention. This book's perfect. I really love the end. I don't know what people want it. Like, why would you? Like, if you couldn't tell what was going to happen at the end, then I don't think you read the series. Like, clearly, what was going to happen happened. So, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's actually a good thing. And it's 900 pages. There's a lot of war in this book. There's a lot of trauma in this book. So yeah, it's kind of a downer at times, but it's so well written that I didn't care. It's good. I greatly enjoyed my time here, and yeah. That. All right. Next up would be Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. This is the fourth book in the Throne of Glass series. 5-star read. Like, I loved it. Everything about it. This book almost feels like 2 books in one book. You get like the sort of like conclusion to the assassin arc, and then you get like the second part of the book. And they feel like distinctly different from each other. Not almost like they could be 2 different books, and it's just jam-packed with so much good stuff, and yeah, I loved it. And there's a scene at the end, I won't spoil, that I thought was like Probably my favorite scene in the series. So yeah, great book. And last but not least would be Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas, which is my favorite book in the Throne of Glass series. It's the third book in the Throne of Glass series. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I love this book. It's, it follows three distinctly different groups of people, considering like three different places, and I think all three storylines are good. But especially the healing storyline. The healing storyline is amazing, and this is the story. This is the book where Aelin probably became like one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. She's up there for sure. She's in the top 5. I don't know where to put her exactly, but I'll do a different video on that, I think. Yeah, I love this book, and I can't recommend this series more. Like, if you like epic fantasy, then I think this is a series that you would enjoy. Yeah, it clearly has a lot of Lord of the Rings influences. I think there's, say, a ton of Harry Potter influence in here. There's a ton of Greek mythology influence in here. There's clearly Disney fairy tales left and right. Like, you can clearly see Cinderella and Snow White and Rapunzel and even Little Red Riding Hood in this series. And yeah, great series, I think. But this is my favorite book in the series, and it's one of my favorite books I've just ever read. So there we go, and that is my year of reading. It was fun. I had a blast. I have a lot of reading planned for 2025. Whether I get to it or not is to be determined, but I will make a video on that and what I definitely plan to read next year.